Right. Okay. So we should be live now. Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Cathleen Thomas. Kathleen, thank you for joining us, coming on to Raptor Aid. I know it's not your natural habitat, this, and we really appreciate you. And I have to make an apology, obviously, me referring to you as RSPB. Obviously I didn't realize you're not at the RSPB anymore, so apologies for that, but we can come on to that anyway. So anyway, welcome, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Don't worry, this won't be too painful, I'm sure of it. So I always start with, before we get on to Hen Harriers and all things regarding the Life Project, I always like to ask the person I'm talking to tell us a bit about their background. And in fact, we've just been talking for half an hour, probably, which would have made a great half an hour to the start of the interview, because yeah, what you were saying was absolutely spot on, and it's exactly the sort of information that I think people need to know regarding getting jobs in conservation. So you can start, by all means, start with where your passion for the natural world came from. Don't feel you have to stick within the parameters of birds of prey, and then yeah, talk about going into your education, PhD, and then career wise. So over to you.
Okay. Well, yeah. So it's a bit of a long story how I ended up working with raptors. So yeah, just let me know if you get bored and I'll stop. But yeah, I mean, I guess I've always been interested in the natural world. So I was quite lucky that we had quite a big garden in the house that I grew up in, so I could play out in the garden. I remember playing with insects and things, and I think actually quite a lot of my early experiences with animals came through captive populations. So we had the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust nearby. So we spent quite a lot of time there, and I still have a deep distrust of swans after being trying to feed the birds and being pecked by a swan, and I still don't like them now. Just to stay away from them is pretty much my MO. But yeah, so I think in terms of birds, it was very much captive things. My grandparents lived in North Wales, so we would go to the Welsh Mountain Zoo, and I would see all kinds of exotic species there, and they had condors and all sorts of things. And then I guess go into things like county shows and seeing, inevitably there'd be a falconer there with a collection of birds of prey. And so I always liked them. I think I quite like seeing the owls of various species. But I'm aware, so I think initially my experience was quite exotic, but in a home setting. So it was, exotic species, but not in the places that they lived. So I guess it was a bit strange, really. I mean, I remember at primary school, I remember sitting in the library and we had this like one TV in a big box with like a roller shutter door, and they rolled it up, and it was very exciting when the TV got wheeled out and a video would come on. And we had this look and read program that had been, I think it was filmed in the 70s. And it was basically to teach us to read, but the story of it was all about peregrine falcons. And so essentially it was these kids discovering this like crime ring with this guy who was fencing peregrine falcons. And even now, whenever I think of peregrines, I just think, oh, well, they're really endangered, aren't they? And and that was kind of the message that I took from it. And it's quite interesting. So I guess, yeah, I would have been sort of upper primary school, maybe 8, 9 years old. And there was an RSPB investigations officer who was part of the story. So I guess it's kind of funny to have sort of come full circle and end up working in the investigations team for a little bit. So that's some of my early experiences, I guess, were quite strange. And then so the school that I went to, when I went to comprehensive school, and there weren't any, so we only had one sixth form in the area. So I had to go into town to go to college to do A levels. So I think there was always that expectation that I would go to university. But even when I started A levels, I knew I had this kind of love of the natural world, but was very much torn between a few different subjects, and in the end went with biology, and then studied biology at university as well. And that's when I started doing kind of field trips and things and getting to see a bit more of the natural world. And I think, and even then I didn't really know what I wanted to do, except that I wanted to do something in biology. It's in my third year at uni, I did an industrial placement, and I actually worked for the government for a year on developing methods for detecting genetically modified plants. So I worked with a team that would test. So when you get your shipments of kind of plants coming in, they would just do DNA testing to make sure none of it was genetically modified, because obviously it wasn't legal in this country. And I think that was when I first started getting into science, really, and realised that actually it was a job, and that it was something that you could do, because I think up until that point, I just thought it was something you studied at school, really. So I kind of then went down a bit of a route of, so I got really into like the DNA stuff, did a master's and ended up doing a PhD on ladybirds. So I guess I probably shouldn't say this, but I think I'm actually an entomologist rather than a true raptor worker just yet. But we'll come on to that. So yeah, that was really interesting. So I spent 4 years investigating invasive species. So I was working on ladybirds. So there was this ladybird species that was native to Asia that had been brought over to Europe and America for kind of pest control. And I was really looking at where it had come from and why it had been successful at being an invasive species. And I really enjoyed, my PhD. I mean, the reason I did it because I wanted to, I like learning and I wanted to study more. And for me, it was more like vocational training kind of is how I approached it. So getting all kinds of skills. And I think so during the course of that, I started doing a bit of teaching as well, teaching undergraduates, started doing a bit of kind of communication work, working with the public, talking about, because ladybirds are such a captivating species. Everybody likes them. They might not, there's plenty of insects people don't really like, but ladybirds seem to have a bit of a get out of jail free card. So yeah, there's all sorts of interesting things we could do there. And I think that's where I just learned such a huge range of skills doing that, and kind of wanted to stay in science, but there just weren't the opportunities. So applied for lots and lots of different roles, didn't really get anywhere with any of them. Ended up moving back home and starting a 0 hours contract minimum wage job kind of thing, which was a bit of a shock, I have to say, because you kind of get led to believe that if you do a PhD, it's going to bring you out in a good place in the job market and graduate salaries and all the rest of it. So I think I hit the ground with a bit of a bump coming out of that. But then and then went into science communication a bit more and education, which again was a really good preparation for especially for the Hen Harrier project, learning to speak to groups of people from all kinds of different backgrounds. So I used to work in a science centre. I used to have to do stage shows, which was incredibly uncomfortable for me because I'm not particularly an outgoing person. So having to kind of command a stage, and we'd be doing all sorts of weird demonstrations and throwing like plastic pigs across the stage and like catapulting them to show people, to teach the kids about like forces and all sorts of different things. And we did this thing where so you put like bubble mix on a kid's hand and then you would set fire to it and the bubbles would kind of would sort of evaporate, and so you would do all kinds of like really risky stuff as well. But I mean, obviously we've been fully trained and everything, so I guess doing things like that. Pardon?
No kid died during the
no kid were injured. No, because you wet their hand first, so the only thing that's going to happen is the heat would just evaporate the water off their hand before it does anything else. But it's just, so I guess that was a pretty good training ground for being quite far outside my comfort zone and having to do difficult things in front of an audience. And working with kids, I mean, you never know what they're going to do or what they're going to say, so you've got to be on your toes because they're quite unpredictable. And then so that was kind of, so that's quite long-winded, but that's kind of where I got to just before I officially got a job in conservation. So that was how I got into it, really, was through the kind of the community events communication side of it. So my first role was a community events officer. So I would plan out the program of what we were going to do, just doing, you know, kind of standard things like bug hunts and pond dipping and that sort of thing, and doing all sorts of different things to engage children and adults just with the natural world. So it was and it was across all the species groups, because I think I guess maybe there's kind of two different ways you can go about it. You can either get really into a specific thing and you can become an expert on a particular species and just know everything about that species and monitor it and all the rest of it. But I kind of, well, whether it was purposefully or not, I kind of went the other way and just got a really broad experience in lots of different things and working with lots of different groups and groups of species and things like that. So my first job in conservation, so initially I was hired 12-month contract. So I knew that, I'd kind of got a foot in the door, but it wasn't all the way in yet. So I guess because I was keen on developing that kind of broad background, so I was doing lots of other things. So I was at one point, so I was studying, so I had my full-time job, I was studying part-time, but then I was also working other jobs to try and get experience and to pay the bills. So I think at one point I had like 5 different jobs and part-time study on top of it, which I'm not really sure how I managed to squeeze everything in. But I guess it's just, I just kind of thought, something's got to come off eventually. One of these avenues has got to get me to where I need to be. And I think, a lot of it is about who you know in the industry and them, I've watched some of your previous talks, with people like Brian and Ruth who have just, I'm not, they're both incredibly talented people, but I think some of it for all of us is just being in the right place at the right time and, and knowing the right person and things happening at the right time for you. So I was kind of hoping that if I just worked really hard, I would eventually, something would happen. So that first role, doing the event, so I got extended by another year, but I was a bit frustrated with that, I think, really, because it's not a very easy way to live, when you're dependent on that income to live on and you don't know from one year to the next whether it's going to be there. It was quite tricky. So after that I kind of got into project management, which I really enjoy, actually, and I think it kind of suited my broad range of skills, because I think when you're a project manager you have to be able to pick up lots of different things very quickly. So I started off managing a big national conservation project. So it was, I kind of think of a project manager, I'm kind of just like a professional nagger. So the project teams they've gone to a funder and they've said, right, look, we want to do this and this is how we're going to do it. They get the funding and then they give it to somebody like me who says, well, have you done that yet? Have you done that yet? Have you done that yet? And just kind of keeps them pushing towards so that they can achieve the thing that they were going to do. So I mean, I think, so I'd done a little bit of project management work before I came to the Hen Harrier project. And then I think, to be honest, I don't think I really understood what I was getting into fully when I joined the Hen Harrier project. So I mean, really for me, as I say, aside from kind of captive populations, that was my first experience of raptors. So all I knew, I mean, obviously going into the interview, I'd done some research about hen harriers and where they live and picked up on some of the political issues. But up until that point, the only experience I'd had of hen harriers was, when all that stuff happened with Prince Harry and his friend who had allegedly been in the area when some birds happened.
When one was shot.
Potentially, allegedly, being shot. So I mean that was the only, and even then I didn't really, you kind of read it and I don't think, obviously, it hadn't, the full sort of weight of that hadn't really hit home. But so I was lucky enough that the people on the interview panel thought that I was all right and that I might be able to do the job. So because I remember actually in the interview they did ask, you know, what would you do if somebody started asking you really difficult questions, or you know, you you were in a meeting and somebody started, like, you know, being really difficult and pushing you about hen harriers and saying that, you know, things were fine as they were. And I remember kind of saying, well, you know, well, I'd just take them outside and then I was like, no, but I don't mean like I'd take them outside and beat them up. I was like, you know, you take them outside and kind of chat to them and, you know, talk it through. So I think maybe I just sort of naively, I guess that, yeah, I thought I got on all right with the people on the panel. And yeah, so they let me in, and yeah, and then it kind of went from there, I guess. And then yeah, so
I tell you what, let me interrupt, only because we'll talk about the Hen Harrier project in a second,
yeah,
and the ins and outs of it. I just want to go back because I think people will be really interested in some of the things we talked about before we came on air. Certainly anyone who's watching this who's potentially going to they're a graduate or they're in a similar position as you. So going back to the PhD, obviously you said you landed with a bump when you got your PhD. Looking back now with all the experience, because you've got an incredible amount of experience in these different areas of conservation and working for organizations, do you still think that the PhD was important, being Dr. Cathleen Thomas, or do you think you'd have still managed to have made your way without it? Does it?
That's something I've reflected on quite a lot. I think the short answer, I think, is yes. I think it's opened doors that maybe wouldn't have been open otherwise. I think, especially as a young woman, I think it gives you a little bit of gravitas. But I think I don't think that's a reason to do one, though. I think, you know, there are plenty of, you know, clever, educated, you know, people that are good at their job that don't have that bit of paper. And I don't think it's a requirement, especially now. I mean, I think, you know, I kind of reflect because I do like learning and I have got a ridiculous number of degrees. And you know, I'm always thinking, oh, I'd like to go and do this course and do that. And but I think, you know, would I advise an 18-year-old to sign up to uni if they want to get into conservation? And I'm not sure I would, to be honest. I think maybe back when I did it, and I mean, and even when I did it, the job market was quite uncertain. And I think, we're in this weird period where, maybe in the past you could have got a job, you know, you would have come out of uni, you would have got a job, and that was kind of it. And, you know, when you get your gold watch on retirement and you've done your however many decades. But I think now, and you know, and I see it in conservation because, you know, I've worked for a few different organisations in conservation, and you do start to see the same people, and you just, oh, who are you working for now? And, you know, and so I think it's, we were kind of saying before, weren't we? I think for me, it's, well, a good friend of mine told me that it's not a job to us, and that's why we do it. It's who we are as people. It's not just that we work for this organisation and that's what we do. It's just, you know, fighting for animals and, you know, trying to protect wildlife and the environment. It's just who we are, and it's just what we want to do. So it's it just is something that we are passionate about, and we try and do it however we can. So I mean, the whole university thing, I think for me is a difficult one. I think I have benefited from it, but I think there were costs, you know, huge costs to it as well. So I don't know
how many you mentioned something then. So you mentioned something about degrees. How many have you done? More than one then? I've got to push you on this. 5?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Wow. Right, we've got to listen to all 5 then. This is fantastic. Biology, obviously.
Yeah, so I did my undergrad at Durham, which was brilliant. So I did broad biology, and it was fantastic because I got to see the whole realm of the subject, you know, from cell biology right through to kind of ecosystems. And it was bloody hard because it was Durham, and you don't get a free ride there. But I was quite proud of myself by the time I'd scraped through at the end, and I was sort of, you know, sitting there alongside everybody else who'd been to private school and what have you, and you know, and I was there with just as good a degree as them, but I just had to work a lot harder for it, maybe. Yeah, so I did that, and then I went to Bangor to do a master's in ecology. So at the time, so that master's course had been running about 40 years, I think. So it's a really well-known ecology course. They don't do it anymore, which is a real shame, because again, it was really good at, so it was part talk, part research, but we also got a trip to the Caribbean in the middle, which was brilliant.
Very nice.
I know, yeah, well, it was the first time, because I hadn't really been abroad, you know, as a kid. It wasn't something that we did, certainly not as far as the Caribbean. And so really, it's only, ironically, it's only through working in biology that I've been on traveled these huge distances by airplane and probably polluted the environment. But anyway, yeah, I had a great time we were out in the Caribbean for a couple of weeks monitoring lizards and yeah, looking at the trees and learning about all the different habitats. So yeah, that was really good. And then I went into my PhD at Hull. Yep. So that was, yeah, ladybirds work. And then, so while I was doing the PhD, they also make you do like a postgraduate training course alongside it. So I did a bit of Japanese. So I did 3 modules of Japanese, and then you do all sorts of other things that you would normally do around like, you know, presenting papers, doing presentations. There was kind of a health and safety aspect, kind of more standard, expected stuff. So that's 4. And then, so then when as I say, when I came out, I got a bit more into the education side of things. But I was finding, so then I was trying to get an education officer type role, and I just couldn't get put in, because I think there's a lot of people, I knew I didn't want to be a school teacher, but I quite like outdoor education and, you know, that kind of learning outside the classroom aspect. And I just felt that because I didn't have the piece of paper that said that I could do education, I was really struggling. And I did find that, so once I had that piece of paper, that helped open doors, and then I was getting the interviews at least. So yeah, I don't know, I guess I was trying to find, I mean, I do enjoy learning, and as I say, even now I kind of sit there and I know, like, because we're all on lockdown, there's all this pressure to be like extra productive, and are you learning 12 languages, and have you done a new whatever, and all of this, and you're homeschooling your kids, and you're doing whatever. And so I started, so the Animal Law Society have been doing some talks about animal law that I started listening to, because then I was like, obviously with all the Hen Harrier stuff, I was like, it might be quite interesting to know a bit more about the law. But I think I park that one for a little bit and just.
I mean, I only shouted 5 then, not because I don't think, you know, anyone, but I didn't do it. I didn't do an undergrad. You see, I was rubbish in school, and I didn't want to. I just wanted to be outside and playing football and all that anyway. And so I did a master's 2 years ago, just straight off. I went in to do a master's. My parents nearly fainted, you know. My brother said, you'll just mess it up, because he was the brainy one anyway. So yeah, now I'm umming and ahhing about doing a PhD, because there's a project that I'm really interested in. Yeah. So then when someone says, and I'm really umming and ahhing about giving up 3 years of my life to a bit, but then when I hear someone who's done 5, I'm like, that's, you know,
I mean, I think
applause. That's brilliant.
I think, but in terms of the PhD, I think, you know, I've said, get into it for the right reasons. If you're doing it for the right reasons, which is that you're interested in the topic and you want to know more about it, because actually having the opportunity to get completely immersed in a topic that you really enjoy, which you've probably found during your masters as well, is just that bit of time to really just concentrate on it. I think, you know, that's really nice to do, and there aren't other opportunities, you know, to do that. So I think, you know, if that's why you're getting into it, then that's, you know, a good reason to do it. Not because, don't do it because you want to be able to put doctor on your credit card, because that doesn't get you anything.
No. Well, exactly. My brother did a PhD, and he just gets wound up about it now. It doesn't really. So
it's like sometimes you're quite apologetic, or I just don't tell people, because it's almost like they just kind of look at you, and it's like, but you know, and I guess because I maybe don't fit the mold of like what people think somebody with a PhD looks like, because I talk with an accent and, you know, and all the rest of it, that they sort of think you know, when you think of somebody with a PhD, or I even still think of, you know, a kind of a Cambridge graduate, and, you know, somebody who's quite middle class and quite posh, and it's not always the case. They let anybody in, really. So
yeah, that's what, funnily enough, that's what my brother said about my masters. He was like, Jimmy, they'll let anyone do a masters, they'll just take your money and fail you. And I was like, yeah, cheers, Steve, for the
yeah.
vote confidence there. But anyway, now,
Harsh.
yeah, that's my brother. So let answer another question then that came from what you were saying earlier. Being a female, have you found that has that held you back? It shouldn't, but obviously did it, or do you
Yeah,
think you?
I think I've certainly been aware of it. I mean, it's hard to know, it's hard to objectively view your own experience, I think. But I mean, I've certainly been aware, you know, whenever I sit down, and now I'm more aware of actually saying something or doing something about it. When you know, if you go to and I think the public are more aware of it as well. You know, if you sit down and there's some kind of panel discussion and there are no women on it, or, you know, you're looking at your senior management team and there are no women on there, then you kind of, yeah, it kind of makes you think, well, you know, what are my prospects, you know, for the future? So I think I've certainly found it interesting, and I think, yeah, there's a massive element of luck as well in terms of what roles you get offered, and I think, you know, you've just got to keep trying, and it is hard, and you know, and I was listening to Brian's talk and Ruth's, you know, when they were chatting to you, and they were kind of like, oh, you know, we were just kind of lucky and in the right place at the right time, and they've never really done interviews and all the rest of it. And I have lost count of the number of job interviews I've had that have been unsuccessful. And, you know, and I think that's something people don't talk about as well, is just how hard it is to get in, and you've just got to keep trying. And I think as well, you know, I'm aware that, so if you have a job description, there's a lot of research around, you know, people applying for jobs and, you know, looking at CVs. If you look at a CV and it's got a man's name on the top, it somehow seems to do better than the exact same CV with a woman's name on the top. So I went through a period where I would just put C on the top of it, rather, you know, C Thomas, rather than putting my full name, because I thought, well, you know, is that part of it? So and I think, you know, that there's all sorts of research that in a job description, so if a guy reads a job description and there might be one thing on there he can do and he'll think, well, I'll go for it, whereas if a woman reads it, there'll be one thing on there she can't do and she'll think, oh, well, I can't even apply because there's one thing I can't do. And I mean, you know, and I know that's very generalizing, but I think it's certainly helped me approach things a bit differently, and sort of think, well, actually, you know, because it's hard, because applying for jobs, it does take a lot of time. And, you know, and even now when I'm, you know, because obviously we'll come on to the project, but my role in the project ended, and a lot of work in conservation is short-term contracts. So you're constantly updating your CV, you're constantly reflecting on what you've learned, pushing yourself forward. So I think, you know, I've tried to look at you know, what I can do or say, or how to frame things to see if that helps. I mean, I it's hard because there is that element of bitterness, especially when you've seen like a job that you would really love to do and you haven't got it. You know, there is an element of bitterness of like, well, who did get it and what have they got that I haven't, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
you know, and you do start looking at it, and you know, you sort of beat yourself up about it, and it can be quite, you know, it's incredibly difficult to pick yourself back up and just keep going. But that's what you've got to do. And as I say, I think for me, I think there has been an element of luck, but I think you can kind of create opportunities for luck to happen in terms of, you know, there's a good Geordie saying that shy burns getting out, which is basically like, you know, if you don't ask, you won't get. So if you don't put yourself forward for something, nobody's going to come over to you and go, oh, I've seen this job, you know, do you think you might be interested? You've just got to go for it, and it might work, it might not. But yeah, I think you've just got to keep trying, really. I mean, yeah,
Well,
it's.
I think I was just going to say, coming back to the project, a massive testament to clearly how good you are is the fact that, you know, Raptor workers on the whole are male, really, older men. You know, it's getting a lot more diverse, which is wonderful. So, you know, well done you for being able to, you know, break into that. And I know I've said this to you off camera, being involved with the North of England Raptor Forum to some extent. We all thought very highly and of you. So yeah, you're obviously doing something right, which is brilliant. So
yeah,
on the project.
Sorry, I was just going to say, yeah, just touching on the Raptor, because I'm sure we'll talk about it more in a minute. But yeah, it's been so actually joining the Hen Harrier project just because it was so high profile. And I didn't really know, because I knew, you know, at the time it kind of had a couple of different project managers already. And I don't know if people were just a bit like, oh God, another one. And here's somebody else we've got to get trained. And, you know, what's she going to want? But actually everybody was so welcoming, and, you know, and go into the kind of the Scottish Raptor study group meetings and the Northern England Raptor Forum meetings. And everybody was so kind. And yeah, and I don't know if it was just because it was nice to just have somebody a bit different in there, somebody a bit younger, or, you know, I don't know, just somebody different. So it's interesting. And I think, you know, and even now it particularly, I think there are certain areas of ecology that still tend to be quite male dominated. And I think, you know, raptor work is one of them. But I think you've just got to, I think it's hard, because I can understand why people, you know, if you're monitoring a species and you know that people are trying to persecute it, then you don't want to be sharing with anybody where it is and, you know, how you're protecting it and where the nests are. So I think, and, you know, and a friend of mine, you know, he said he's worked in this field for decades. He grew up with some of these guys, and they still won't share things with him. So, you know, I felt quite lucky actually that people did. And I don't know, I've always just tried to understand where people are coming from, and just be try and be a nice person to work with, I think, and just try and help them out a bit. I think, you know, especially my experience, because, you know, one of the big parts of conservation that we haven't really touched on is obviously volunteering. So aside from, you know, all of these paid roles and going to uni, I've done a huge amount of volunteering, and you know, most people do, and it's kind of an expectation to get into this field that you'll just work for free. Because you kind of get to the point where you're like, well, do you know what, actually I'm quite well qualified and I've got quite a lot of experience. At what point am I actually going to get paid for some of this work? You know, and I haven't done exotic things, you know, I haven't been and worked in a cheetah sanctuary in Africa, or, you know, any of that sort of exciting stuff. It's just like I say, you know, there was a wildfowl and wetlands trust, so I just like went and volunteered with a few ducks and helped them out for a bit, or, you know, wherever it is. Doing some local squirrel surveys, things like that. So I think once you've been a volunteer as well, you get a better appreciation of what it's like, and, you know, and you get good and bad managers looking after you. And so I think then when you're on the other side and you're working with the volunteers, I think it helps as well to just have an appreciation of people have other things in their life. I mean, yeah, maybe raptor workers are very raptor obsessed, but they do, you know, they do have families that they see now and then, and, you know, and there are they do have a small amount of other things going on in their lives aside from their obsession. So I think it's, you know, it's just being wary of that. But yeah, no, I'm incredibly grateful to all of the raptor workers. And I think, yeah, we might come on to this, but I think I've kind of done my raptor experiences kind of backwards, because I've done the Hen Harrier project, and now I'm trying to so I've joined my local raptor study group. Took a while to get in, but yeah, so hoping, I mean, yeah, obviously in lockdown it's difficult to do anything, but as soon as I can get out, I'm going to start. And we've got a few peregrines and sparrowhawks around, so I'm hopefully going to get to do that. So yeah, kind of done things backwards a bit, I think. But
well, you've got the bug now, so that's all that matters.
Just whether I've got enough hours in the day, I think.
No, you'll always find hours in the day for raptors. Trust me. That's what you'll learn, that you'll always find time to watch a raptor. So okay, the Hen Harrier project, the live project. Just give us a sort of, anyone tuning in who has no idea what it is and what your role was, just sort of give us an overview of what the project was and your role in it.
Yeah. So for anybody who doesn't know, so a hen harrier is a bird of prey that we should have a lot of in the UK. So we should have about 5,000 birds in the UK, but we only have about 1,000, and that's principally due to the birds being killed in association with the way that grouse moors are managed. So hen harriers are, as I say, are birds of prey, so they will predate on grouse chicks. Which obviously, if you're trying to sell people the opportunity to shoot that grouse chick, you don't want the hen harrier getting there first. So that's kind of the key issue, really, that the project was set up to or why hen harriers are declining, which is what the project was set up to address. So I mean, yeah, really the aim of the project, so it started in 2014, which is kind of, yeah, long before I really knew what a hen harrier was and what the issues were, but it started yeah, really to try and just get a better understanding of what was happening to the birds. So to try and we were doing a lot of kind of direct, so nest monitoring, so working out where the birds were nesting, because we knew that people were killing them at nests. So we knew, you know, if you read, well, you've got Mark Avery on in a couple of days, haven't you? And if you read his book Inglorious, so he worked with RSPB investigations, you know, during his time there, and there's all sorts of awful incidents, you know, in the book of people doing awful things, so going to nest sites and stamping on the eggs, stamping on the chicks, stamping on the parent bird, or, you know, pouring liquid nitrogen onto the eggs. So, you know, obviously any chick in there would die, but you wouldn't see, you know, if you went to look at the nest, it would just look intact. And so you would maybe just put it down to infertile eggs. So, you know, there's all sorts of awful things that people have been doing at the nests of these birds. And I should say, so for people that don't know, hen harriers nest on the ground in heather moorland, and because so the female will incubate on the nest and the male will go off and hunt for food, and he will bring it back, and they do this amazing thing called a food pass that I'm yet to see in real life, but hopefully one day. But they basically, like in midair, they kind of throw, so they eat things like voles and small birds, meadow pipits and things, and the male will kind of throw it to the female, or he kind of throws it anyway, and the female has to try and catch it, and they kind of somersault around each other, and it's, yeah, it's like kind of like 3D basketball is how I think about it. And yeah, so what that means is then, so the female bird then takes the food into the nest or close to the nest, and it just means that for a human observer, it can be quite easy to locate nests. So that's why, you know, a lot of persecution was focused on the nest sites. So we were doing monitoring work to try and just identify sites. We would use all kinds of different surveillance methods to see what was going on. But then also, so that when the project started, we didn't really know what the birds were doing outside of the breeding season, because as I say, they're quite visible when they're on nests, but outside of that, in the winter. So I know Brian obviously was doing a lot of wing tagging studies, but what we were able to do through the project was we were using satellite tags. So they're like little backpacks that we put on the birds, and they, as the name suggests, they transmit to the satellites, and then you can get a location for where the birds are, which has just revolutionized what we know about their movements. And so when the project started, we were aiming to fit 24 tags. I think when they wrote the project, I think they'd assumed that would all happen in a year. But as it ended up, you know, being over the full course of the 5 years, and we ended up we fitted more than 100 tags, which is fantastic, and obviously hugely over target. But, you know, these tags were just, as I say, giving us all kinds of really interesting information about the birds. So we were finding out things. Sorry, I've just realised you asked for a short summary of the project.
No, carry on. This is
I'll just carry on talking about it. But I mean, yeah, and for me, so because of my background so as I say, I kind of went into sort of molecular ecology, and I was doing kind of DNA work. And the reason that but I was still looking at dispersal. And the reason that we use DNA, so we use genes to look at dispersal, so movement of populations. And the reason that we do that is because we can't track an individual. So, you know, with a ladybird, there's no way you can track where an individual ladybird goes, or at least not with the technology that we've got at the moment. Yeah. So what you would do is you would look at ladybird populations, and you would look at which genes they shared. And the more genes they shared, the more likelihood there is that they're mixing. Because obviously, you know, they've got wings. They kind of behave like raptors a little bit. I think there's a few similarities there. But yeah, so for me to be able to actually fit a tag to an individual and see what that individual bird was doing was brilliant. And, you know, and there's still a lot of work. So we're still going through, you know, some of the sat tag data, and we'll be able to publish that soon, I hope, or at least in the next year or so. But we were finding amazing things, like, you know, we've had a couple of birds that were tagged in Scotland that have spent the winter in Ireland. And so these are birds, you know, so they're coming off the nest. So they fledge kind of like August time. And And then, so that basically means that they leave the nest, they start to learn to look after themselves, you know, they're foraging for food by themselves. And within a couple of months, these tiny little birds are making enormous journeys across seas to other continents. And, you know, we had one bird who, so it was around Halloween time, she was called Skylar, and she was tagged in Scotland when she was, so we tag them just before they leave the nest so that they're fully grown. But they're sort of, you know, easy to catch. And she, yeah, for like a week, I don't know what it was, that she just decided to, she flew off to Northern Ireland, flew right across to the west coast in Galway, and then a couple of days later she was back in Scotland, and she never went back to Ireland. So I don't know, and you just don't know what's caused that. Like what is it about her that made her do that? Because her mother didn't. So we'd also tagged her mother, and her mother didn't do that. We have had a couple, as I say, a couple of other Scottish birds that have done the same. So we've had a couple of males that have spent time in Ireland over the winter and then come back to Scotland. We've got a bird at the minute that he was born last year, and he went to Spain for the winter. And that in itself was amazing, that this little bird, you know, as I say, coming off the nest, only a couple of months old, flew all the way from sort of central England all the way down to Spain, and he hung out in Spain all winter. One of the team actually, you know, took himself over there on his own holiday in his own time, went over there to find this bird and just see what he was doing. And that was brilliant, because then we could hear about, you know, because when you see the tag data, you kind of just get dots on a map. And I mean, yeah, it's interesting if you like that kind of thing, but it doesn't tell you what condition the bird's in, what they're doing. And so yeah, this guy that one of the team that went out in his own time, and he kind of came back, and he was like, and it was great because, you know, this bird was hanging out with, he had another male that he was hanging around with, and you know, and he's really kind of settled in with the well, I don't know if they were locals, I don't know if they were other birds that had migrated there for the winter. And then he's come back to England this year, and he's actually on a nest.
Oh, brilliant.
You know, you're talking about like 1,000-mile journey that this little bird, you know, and he's just about a year old now, and he's gone all that way and come back again, and he's made it back safely, and now he's got a female on chicks on a nest, which is brilliant. So, you know, you get to know all these little stories from the tags.
Yeah.
But then obviously then comes the bad side of it as well. So, you know, part of the project was, as I say, so we knew that these birds were being killed, principally on grouse moors, illegally, because they are, you know, they do have the highest level of legal protection. So we knew that you know, not all was rosy with these birds, and so so it wasn't the main aim for using the tags, really was about learning more about the dispersal. So it was really a byproduct that, so you can see from the tag data, and I've spent, you know, days and days going through it, and you can see you get all kinds of different readings from the tag. And so you can see when it's performing naturally, but what you do get is you get what's called a sudden stop. And that's where, you know, so you've got this electronic device, you know, in the same way, you know, that you've got, you know, your phone or your laptop or whatever, and you can sort of see if it's starting to play up a bit. But what would happen is it would just suddenly stop transmitting. So we'd be getting really good data, we'd be seeing exactly what the bird's doing, and then just suddenly stops. And that's, you know, there's plenty of research now that's showing that that's indicative of somebody basically, you know, messing around with the tag, interfering with the tag. And you know, and I mean, and even so, there was a study published, I think it came out last year. Time's gone a bit weird at the minute, but so there was a study published in England, that showed that 72% of hen harriers were dying, you know, confirmed or considered to have been illegally killed, and it was 10 times more likely to happen on grouse moors. And that was from tag data. And in the same way, there was a study before that on golden eagles, where again they'd fitted tags, and they were finding that, you know, these tags, so I think about a third of the population of golden eagles were being illegally killed. And so we were finding that with our data as well. And there's some really, you know, one of the things that I think I reflect on a bit in terms of working in conservation, the only time I actually see an animal these days tends to be when it's dead. So you don't, you know, through work anyway, you know, I mean, obviously I do a bit of bird watching and things in my own time, but, you know, and especially through the Hen Harrier project, it's incredibly difficult when the only hen harriers you're coming into contact with are dead ones. You know, you spend very little time, and even if you do see a live one, you're kind of anxious for it, and you know, you're worried about what's going to happen. So yeah, so we were finding all kinds of awful things. So we've had some of our tag birds. So we have with the investigations team, there's a protocol that, so the birds are monitored pretty much every day. And if we suspect something's happened to them, then you know, we attempt to recover it. And so that, because you know, so the aim for the project really was that we wanted to understand why they were dying, and what proportion really we were losing in you know, suspicious circumstances, so how many of them were being killed. And we just had some awful things where, you know, so we found several birds that when we recovered them, so we recovered the bodies, and there was an x-ray, so the vet does an x-ray, and there was lead shot in them. So, you know, we had a few birds where there was lead shot in its leg or in its head, you know, in its skull. So, and that's obviously, you know, in some cases, so the vet can tell whether the bird, you know, whether that's killed the bird or not. And obviously, you know, in some cases that they were being shot to death. We had one bird, so its tag stopped working just before Christmas. And the satellite tags are solar powered. So when you get towards the winter and the day length starts to get a bit shorter, you do see the battery starts to, you know, it can run down a bit, just depending on what the bird's doing and how active it is during daylight hours. So you kind of expect them to run down a little bit. So we had one, as I say, just before Christmas, that 2 years ago, that it looked like that. So we just thought it had died naturally, and the tag battery looked like it had kind of just, so we could see the bird had stopped moving, the battery had run down, but we couldn't, you know, the guys went out and they couldn't find it. So we kind of just thought, well, we'll see if the tag comes back on, we can go and have another look. And it did. So in the spring, when the day length started getting a bit longer, the tag came back on, and this time they found it. And when they found it, you know, she had her foot in a trap. So she was in a spring trap, and again, so it went straight to the vet so that the vet could tell us, you know, what had happened. And you just, you know, you get these heartbreaking postmortems back where the vet just says, you know, this bird has suffered horrendously before it's died, because it's either died from the shock of being, you know, caught in the trap, or it's died of starvation because it's got caught in the trap and it couldn't get out. So, you know, and you're just thinking, well, you know, what if we'd found it that first time? Would we have been able to, you know, could the vet have saved it? I mean, I know there was one that Chris Packham did a video of where it had got a broken leg, and I saw that, you know, that had gone to the vet and they'd attempted to save it, but again, it just didn't, you know, the amount of damage when they've got such fine bone structure. You know, they just, and it was awful because they tried everything to save it and they just couldn't. You know, so you're seeing all these different things, and these are birds, you know, these are birds that we've got connections to because we've seen them as chicks. You know, we've monitored them on the nest, we've seen the eggs hatch, we've seen them grow up, and I do, you know, I love seeing the creepy little hen harrier chicks on the nest because they look so strange, especially when they first hatch out and they're all pink with these big black eyes. And they just kind of like, they just sit there, and you know, they're really weird little things. And then, you know, when you watch them and they develop their feathers and they start to move around the nest, and you can see the parents looking after them, and you know, and then eventually the team would go in and they would, you know, ring them or tag them if they were ones we were going to tag. And so you've kind of watched them grow up, and so it's really devastating. Sorry,
I was just going to say, on that subject, you're talking about the development. I just wanted to interrupt and talk about another aspect of it as well. It hurts because you also link it into public engagement as well. And did you do the public engagement side of things that you did? Did you link it into schools and were kids involved in that sort of thing, or was that part of the project, that side of thing, or not? What was the? Yeah,
I mean, obviously I can't speak for before I joined, but when I joined, it was. I mean, it's difficult. So within the project, one of the things that we had to do, or we said we were going to do, is engage children. So we had, you know, certain targets for speaking to primary school students, speaking to secondary school students. We also did work with gamekeepers in colleges, which I'll come back to if you remind me. but yeah, I think for me, as I say, you know, I had kind of experience of working with primary school children, and I can see why on the face of it, when we put the project, you know, when the project bid was put together, it was kind of, well, we're going to go and talk to primary school students in these areas, you know, in moorland areas, in the special protection areas where the Hen Harriers are living, and we're going to go and talk to primary school children about it. But it's incredibly difficult, partly because, you know, these children, some of their parents or their grandparents or their uncles or whoever are gamekeepers themselves, and they're involved in moorland management, and so they're involved in some of these things that are happening. And I'm not saying, you know, they're all bad, you know, they're apparently are you know, so I found it incredibly difficult. And I think what I encourage the team to do, and I think, you know, as I say, in my time, I encouraged the team to kind of take it to a point where we were teaching the kids about Hen Harriers, and if they would ask, and we would sort of explain why they were declining, but we wouldn't really hammer it home. Because and at that age it's quite a difficult message as well, of like, well, these things are dying because people are killing them, and like, you know, and you could get quite difficult questions from those communities. So I think, you know, from my perspective, I think it's great to, I think at primary level it's great to enthuse children about raptors and other species. I think, yeah, so the gamekeeping colleges, I think that's really, for me, so for me that was an interesting one, and I think it's been worthwhile. Not everybody shares that view. I think I was surprised. So we went into a few different colleges, and you know, and again, I think, you know, being a young woman going into that situation where you've got these, you know, sort of these lads kind of sitting there, and they know that you're from the RSPB, and they have an opinion of what they think the RSPB is, and quite often they are, you know, they might be younger than you, but they're bigger than you. And you know, and you kind of go into this environment, and I mean, what we did with the work that we did with them, we just explained the situation to them, you know, and we said, look, this is what's happening at the moment. And the way that we phrase it, so we kind of gave the background, and then we just said, well, let's have a chat about it, you know, let's have a bit of a debate, for want of a better word. So what happens, you know, what happens if we just carry on with the way things are? Hen Harriers are probably going to go extinct. Is that okay? What if we, you know, another option could be that we license grouse moors. Does that help? Does that make it more complicated? What if we ban shooting altogether? So, you know, we would kind of talk through these other options, or is there another option that we just haven't thought of? And because, you know, I genuinely think that, so it's, again, reflecting on my time in conservation, it's funny that, so obviously the way you have to work your way up, you kind of start in quite a practical role before you are able to get into the more strategic roles. And I always, so the role that I have now is quite strategic, and I'm really enjoying that. And it is quite a lot of brain work, but I think, you know, as you've probably realised, that's the kind of thing that I enjoy a bit more. I'm not really built for practical work. I'm too small and I can't carry heavy things. And so I think it's kind of funny that, so the only people really in terms of the strategic stuff are the people that have worked their way to get there, but they're not necessarily the best. You know, there could be younger people that do have good ideas. And so I do genuinely go to them and say, you know, is there something that we haven't thought about? Because really, genuinely, we all just want to fix this in a way that hopefully would work for everybody in an ideal world. And so I think, or I felt, going to the students like that and making them, and it wasn't, you know, it was true that we wanted to know what they thought. I felt like they kind of responded to us a bit better. But I mean, and one of the things that surprised me, you know, when you start talking to them, because as I say, I mean, you know, I just went to a sort of an urban comprehensive, and gamekeeping wasn't even a thing that I knew about, let alone then go and do a course to study it. And so I was kind of chatting to the students and saying, well, you know, why are you doing this course? How did you find out about it? And you get some that are, you know, well, you know, my parents or my grandparents, or, you know, there's a connection, somebody that they know is a gamekeeper. But quite a few of them had sort of said, oh, well, I told the teacher at school that I liked animals, and they told me to go and be a gamekeeper. And you kind of think, well, I don't know that that's necessarily, for somebody who's keen on animals, maybe it was a bit of naivety about what the role entailed, I don't know. But for me, if I said I like animals and somebody said, we'll go into this job where you get to kill them all the time, I'd be a bit like, not really sure about that. But yeah, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, I thought I quite liked that aspect about the project, because I think I'm safe in saying that I think, things like Hen Harrier Day, and probably, hopefully there's an audience listening to this, but I think in terms of the people we speak to, it tends to be a bit of an echo chamber. And I think if I had to say that the project, in my view, could have done anything better, I think maybe engaging with some of those, the actual communities of people that are more involved in these things. Because I think, as I say, Hen Harrier Days and things are great for speaking to like-minded people, and I do, it's a really hard field to work in, because as I say, the bulk of the species, you're in this because you love these species, but you only see dead ones, and it does get to you. And I've seen grown men get really upset about it. And I think just being able to, sorry, I've completely lost track.
That's all right.
Yeah, I think it's just hard seeing dead things all the time, isn't it? Sorry,
No, it's all right. Don't worry. I think you're absolutely right. It's something that really interests me. I did my master's was in anthrozoology, so I'm fascinated by the sort of human animal interactions, whatever the subject, but especially obviously birds of prey. So it interests me. I'd have loved to have come in and listened to young gamekeepers and tried to. I think you've got to make anything work. Yeah, you've got to try and understand the other side. A lot of people will argue, and I can understand it completely, especially all the news that's coming out at the moment regarding hen harriers, that we're past all that now. But yeah, you've got, like you say, even talking to the kids, that you've got to remember that they've got links into, potentially some of them will have links into this industry, and so you've got to be sensitive to that to some extent. But it's interesting to hear you say about that you think we should do, the project could have done more. With that in mind, what achievements, what were you really proud of, the achievements that came from the project? Obviously it's finished now, 5 years is gone. What are you really proud of? What is still to come from the project, i.e. papers to be published and data to be looked at?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm proudest of really is the team and how everybody worked together. I mean, there's tangible achievements, but I think, as I say, coming into that established team, and I'm not saying there weren't days where we all hated each other, and well, maybe not quite that bad, but there were days where we would have arguments. It wasn't all rosy, but on the whole, we knew that we were all working for the same thing. And as I say, they welcomed me in. They didn't know who I was. They welcomed me in, and we seemed to rub along okay. So I think, just and as I say, I think for me, the contribution of the Raptor workers was huge. So this project, so we had about £2.5 million for this project, which we, over 5 years, which we spent on hen harrier conservation. But actually what we've done, so when the project ended, we tallied up the contribution of the Raptor workers, and I hate monetizing conservation, but it's just the area that we're in at the moment, is that's what people respond to. So actually when we totted it up, the Raptor workers themselves had actually contributed like another £1 million of work, just in terms of the travel that they'd done off their own back, paying for their own fuel to go and monitor these nest sites and monitor roost sites and help us out. But also the hours that they'd put in just sitting on the hillside watching for birds that may or may not turn up, especially in the north of England. The hen harrier population is so low that you could sit out there for weeks and not see anything. So just the fact that people were willing, they were willing to do it. So I think that's something that I think just that kind of partnership that we built, that I hope is still going. I'm sure it's still going strong. I think I'm really, really proud of the team for everything that they did. I mean, in terms of tangible achievements, so as I say, we fitted many more satellite tags than we had anticipated, and partly that was because of additional contribution. So organisations like Lush, who contributed money towards satellite tags, and then a raft of other sort of funders who funded smaller amounts to pay for them. And as I say, that's really helped us understand where the birds are going and what they're doing. So we're still working through that data. And as I say, so hopefully we'll have some scientific papers coming out soon, that, because I think it's just understanding, I think, so that there's obviously the obvious question around, you know, what proportion of them are being persecuted, what land use is it on, you know, do we find a similar thing to, you know, the previous paper that found that high numbers are being persecuted on grouse moors. So that part's to come. But I think, yeah, for me, the exciting part is around the ecology of these birds and where they're traveling, because, you know, we've got some birds that, as I say, so some birds make these enormous journeys, but some of them don't. Some of them stay quite close to home. And trying to understand about where they're flying and where they're going and why are some of them safe. I mean, I think, so there's been, and we do need to do something about it. So I think, yeah, that's on that side of things, and hopefully helping to protect hen harriers into the future. I mean, yeah, I would hope, again, so with the kind of public engagement side of things, and working with the communities, it's hard to know, it's hard to gauge the tangible impact that you've had over a short period of time. But I would hope that, you know, certainly the people, I mean, we spoke to kind of nearly 13,000 people, and that wasn't just, you know, somebody walking past a stall in a tent. That was, you know, sitting and doing an hour's presentation on, or sometimes longer, depending on how long I went on for, but you know, a presentation on, this is what the situation is, these are some of the birds, this is what we're learning, this is what's happening to them on your, you know, on your doorstep. So I hope that we've educated more people as well, and I think, you know, and that's got to help. I mean, Hen Harrier Day, the attendance at Hen Harrier Day seems to have been growing, and obviously, you know, this year we've got the first one in Wales, we've got more in Scotland, so that's kind of, the support for that is growing. So I hope that having increased public awareness as to what's happening, and I think generally, and obviously especially it's more acute at the moment, but I think generally the population in the UK, people are getting more connected to nature and they are more concerned. I think, you know, because coming back to my early experiences of wildlife, it was very much about wildlife abroad, and, you know, and it's about tigers and it's about rhinos and it's about all these big charismatic creatures. And it wasn't until really that I joined the Hen Harrier Project that I was like, well, hang on a minute, but all of this is going on in this country, but we don't talk about it. We don't focus on our own, you know, the mess of our own species and our own ecosystems, because I guess it's far easier to focus somewhere else and to say, oh, well, aren't that country terrible, and look what they're doing, and they've killed all their tigers, and, you know, and yet we're here doing the exact same thing with our hen harriers. So
yeah, and it's interesting, because, you know, you talking before about you've never seen a food pass as well, and it is, this stuff happens in the UK. I mean, obviously there's not many pairs, but it's wonderful for, you know, even watching a male hen harrier sky dancing, or a golden eagle or sky dancing, or a barn owl. You're right. I'm a big fan of, you know, the UK's got some amazing wildlife out there. You just need to scratch the surface a little bit. So
yeah, I know. And that's kind of then what makes it so. The only problem I think with working in conservation is it ruins the outdoors for you, because then, you know, then when you are outside, and so because I knew all this stuff about moorland, and actually we should have had all these birds of prey that we didn't. So then when you're out for a walk, you can't even really enjoy it, because you're just thinking, oh, do you know, there should be golden eagles, or, I mean, I've been quite excited, although obviously haven't been able to see them, but I know there's been white-tailed seagulls up in Yorkshire and this year, and so, you know, to see those just flying, they're enormous birds, you know, like 2-meter wingspan. They're huge things to see in the sky, let alone, things like golden eagles, hen harriers, all sorts of things that we should be seeing, and everybody should be able to see them. It shouldn't just be, you know, a few people up in the hills that get the opportunity to see them. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm just conscious of time. That's all right. I don't want to keep you all evening. We've done a bloody good stint there. One question you probably, because you've watched, I know you've watched a few of the videos, I always ask them. So I know, to be honest, Kathleen, you've been fantastic. The information and the frankness of you know, talking about getting into conservation and your work in conservation is just exactly one of the reasons why I've done these interviews, because I want people to see and learn about this sort of thing. But as I say, I asked Ruth this, and I've asked most people this. If you were to give one person a piece of advice, then for getting into conservation, go on. If we've not already covered it, what would your one bit of advice be? It can be the simplest thing if you want.
I think it's just to keep trying. I think, yeah, just not to give up, because eventually an opportunity will come. I think. I mean, yeah, I think. I mean, I always try. I think because I had such a hard fight to get in, and even now I don't feel like I'm fully in. I still feel like I'm on the edges of it and could be chucked out at any moment. But I try and help other people to get in as well. Because I've been trying to think about, especially at the moment with the pandemic, and a lot of people are losing jobs and things. And I think, if there's anything I can do to help, or if there are people out there that want to get into conservation and they want help, or they just want to have a chat about interview prep or whatever it is, I'm quite happy to help support people. I mean, I can only give my own personal, I'm not a careers advisor. I can only give them my own personal views and experiences. But I think, yeah, don't give up. And I think the other thing, if I'm allowed two pieces, I think is just put yourself forward. Don't wait, as I say, don't wait for opportunities to come to you, because you'll be waiting a long time. I think find somebody who's doing something that you're interested in, and they might not want to talk to you, they might not want to do things, but they might not want to help you out, but don't give up, because somebody will. There's a lot of really lovely people in conservation, and we're all up against it, because, as I say, there isn't enough resource to save everything we want to save, and that's just something that we have to live with on a daily basis. But somebody will help you. There will be an opportunity somewhere. And yeah, at the very least, I think, if you can volunteer, as I say, it doesn't need to be exotic volunteering in countries. It could be as easy as working with animals somewhere, or working with people, doing a bit of community engagement, whatever skills you can get, because there are so many different roles in conservation, that there's anything really, I think is helpful, just to keep going and keep building.
Brilliant. Excellent. That's perfect. Right. Thank you very much for your time, Kathleen. It wasn't too painful, hopefully. You've been wonderful. For someone who said they were, you were nervous and you weren't sure, that was spot on, and you've done 75 minutes. So that was, and I've hardly had to say a word, so that was brilliant. It was absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and yeah, hopefully people are listening, so thank you to them as well. And yeah.
Thank you.